Hey everybody, welcome back to the Behavior Revolution Scriptures, and today we're talking about the red heifer. That's right, the red heifer. This was an offering, probably one of the most important offerings that Yisrael was instructed to offer up to Yahusha. And of course, as we know today, it finds its ultimate fulfillment, this shadow, in Yahusha himself and what he did on the torture stake. So a lot of today's episode is going to be about Yahusha. Isn't that amazing? We're going to talk about Yahusha and what he really accomplished when he hung on that stake. And so where are we up to? We've just come from Aaron's staff budding, the stick, _, budding in the most set apart place next to the ark. Overnight it was budded and blossomed and bloomed and raw almonds and everything on it. So he that was a sign. These are my chosen people. This is my chosen tribe. This is my chosen priesthood. And then we got into the semantics of it all. You know, this is how you're going to be supported. The tribe of Louis, this is how you're going to be supported. And you're not going to have any land. You're going to be taking a tithe instead, 10%. You give your 10% of your 10% to their 10%, and they give their 10% to your 10%, and 10% on the 10%. All right? So it's all about 10%. So today, let's go on to the red heifer. Yahusha said to Moshe and Aaron, "It's time I gave you this important legal instruction. Tell the people of Israel to bring you a red heifer." A heifer, if you don't know, is just a female cow that's never had any calves. So bring a red heifer, a perfect animal with no defects and has never been used, never been yoked to a plough. So a perfect animal that's never been yoked to a plough. So it's never been used for any common work. This is not some common animal, this is a special animal. Give it to Eleazar the priest, that was Aaron's son. He will take it outside the camp, and slaughter it, taking some of its blood on his finger and sprinkling it 7 times toward the front of the tabernacle. Then the heifer must be completely burned. So if he's got to sprinkle it towards the front, he's outside the camp. So he's got to be able to see the tabernacle, good line of sight, and he can sprinkle the blood towards the front of the tabernacle. Then the heifer must be completely burnt as Eleazar watches. Its hide, meat, blood, and dung completely burnt. And he will then take a stick of cedar, hyssop branch, and some scarlet thread, throw them into the fire where the heifer is burning. So it's making a bit of a blend. Of course, all those things are going to go into the animals burning, all it's going to burn together, and it'll end up in the ashes. The ashes were very important. Then the priest must wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and afterward he may return to the camp, but he will be unclean. So this offering actually made him unclean. Most offerings are to make you clean and acceptable, aren't they? This one made him unclean. So he'll be unclean until evening. The man who burns the animal must also wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. And he too will be unclean. That's if he's got an assistant helping him. He'll be unclean too until evening. Then someone who is already clean will gather up the ashes of the heifer and put them in a clean place outside the camp, kept there for the community of Israel to use in the water for purification ceremonies performed for the removal of disobedience. So those 2 guys are unclean, then someone else has got to come out who's already clean, and they will gather up the ashes of the heifer and put them in the clean place outside the camp. So still outside the camp, just in a clean place, kept there for the community of Israel to use in the water for purification ceremonies, which we'll go into in a minute, performed for the removal of disobedience, to cleanse people, sickness, disease, disobedience, their crimes. It's for that. The man who gathers up the ashes of the heifer must also wash his clothes, and he will be unclean until evening too. So we've got another guy involved now. He came out, he's clean, he's touched it all and got involved with it, and now he's unclean as well. This is a permanent instruction for the people of Israel and any foreigners who live among them. All those who touch a dead body, a dead human body, will be unclean for 7 days and must purify themselves on the 3rd and 7th days with the water of purification. What's the water of purification? We just saw it up there. This heifer ash mixed with living water. Yeah? This red heifer was burnt up, and the, what was it? The cedar, the hyssop and the scarlet was all put in it. That was the ash, and the blood of the animal and all its guts and innards and everything was burnt, turned into ash. Then it was mixed with water, living water, and that became the cleansing agent. So, all those who touch a dead body will be unclean for 7 days and must purify themselves on the 3rd and 7th days with the water, this water cocktail of purification. Then they will be clean. But if they don't do this on the 3rd and 7th days, they'll continue to be unclean even after the 7th day. All those who touch a dead body and don't cleanse themselves properly will defile my tabernacle. That's what this is all about. Defiling his tabernacle. And what's in the tabernacle? The portal. So all those who don't cleanse themselves properly will defile my tabernacle, and they must be cut off from the community of Israel. And since the water of purification was not sprinkled on them, they remain unclean. Are you already starting to have scriptures come to mind about being sprinkled? The blood, the cleansing, the water, all these sort of things come to mind. These are where all the patterns are laid out. And the writers, the emissaries, Yahusha's followers who wrote the latter books, they just assumed that you understand all this. They're writing to people who are firmly raised up and entrenched in these understandings and truths are brought up in them, or they're really well known to them. It's their foundational teaching and thinking and mindset. So they're talking to those sort of people. So if you haven't gone through all this and understand what they're talking about, well, enter religion. That's why you end up with all these cuckoo understandings, because there's no pattern. You're just out there doing whatever you want. So here's the instruction for when someone dies inside a tent. Death. So we're talking about deaths. In the last paragraph, it was someone who touched a dead body. Now it's someone who's died in a tent. Talking about death a lot, isn't he? All those who enter that tent and those who were inside when the death occurred will be unclean for 7 days. And any open container in the tent that wasn't covered with a lid is also unclean. And if someone in an open field touches the corpse of someone who was killed with a sword or who dies a natural death, or if someone touches human bones or a grave, that person will be unclean for 7 days too. Yahusha hates death. Remember, death is the most unnatural, abominable thing. It's on the top of his abomination list. Death. He didn't create it. It's the opposite of him, really. It's the absence of him, because wherever he is life. That's why that's the main thing he came to set out to do. Because the minute disobedience entered the world, death, time, not immorality, more morality, our human morality, death, there's going to be an end. So he came along and he just healed people. All the effects of death, all the effects of aging and time and everything, he came, and wherever he went and whoever he touched was just cleansed, So, and of course, when he hung on the stake, he dealt with lawlessness, evil, wickedness, disobedience, and death all at once. Hates death. And anybody who touches anything dead was unclean. So to remove the uncleanliness, put some of the ashes from the burnt heifer. Here we go, here's that heifer mix again, the mix of the ashes. Put some of that in a jar and pour some living water over them. Then someone who is already clean must take a hyssop branch and dip it into the water and sprinkle it in the tent, on all the furnishings in the tent, and on the people who were in the tent, and also on the people who touched human bones, or touched someone who was killed, or who died naturally, or touched a grave. Anyone who's come in contact with death, basically, can be cleansed through this mixture of red heifer ashes mixed with living water. So, and on the 3rd and 7th day, the person who is clean must sprinkle the water on those who are unclean. Then on the 7th day, the people being cleansed must wash their clothes and bathe themselves, and that evening they will be cleansed of their defilement. But those who become unclean and don't cleanse themselves will be cut off from the community. Those who become unclean and don't cleanse themselves will be cut off from the community, for they have polluted my tabernacle And since the water of purification has not been sprinkled on them, they remain unclean. This is a permanent instruction for the people. Those who sprinkle the water of purification must afterward wash their clothes, and anyone who then touches the water for purification will remain unclean until evening. Anything and anyone that a defiled person touches will be unclean until evening. He doesn't like all this death and uncleanliness, does he? So there's another statement there. This is a permanent instruction for the people. Permanent means forever, doesn't it? Are we looking for a red heifer, burning the ashes, keeping them in some Tupperware containers in the pantry? And then whenever we have a sickness or disease or come in contact with somebody dead, we open up the Tupperware and, mix some running water in it, make a bit of a herbal tea, sprinkle it on each other. Are we doing it? It says permanent. It says forever. Or has this possibly been fulfilled, transformed, seen it come to its fruition in a person? There are some who would do this. Look. There is a group of Jews on the constant lookout. There's a group of Jews on the constant lookout for a perfect, special red-skinned cow, which will become very necessary when the long-anticipated third temple is rebuilt in Jerusalem. Have you ever heard such a steaming pile of horror that smacks Yahusha and his once and for all sacrifice right in the chops? Where is Yahusha's portal now? I'm not even going to spend any time on that because that's just beyond ridiculous stupidity. And anyone who wants to entertain that idea should be in a padded cell. So, we've read the text. Let's go into some understandings here, because this is phenomenal when you crack it open and see all the juicy gems and innards going on. It's amazing. Let's review the excruciating details. It's pretty intense, wasn't it? Let's review the excruciating details of the red heifer sacrifice. Step 1. A ranking priest, not the high priest, but a senior level priest, escorts the red female cow to a common woodpile, cuts the throat of the cow, and then gathers the dripping blood into a ceremonial vessel. That was step 1. Step 2. The priest turns around and with his finger sprinkles blood 7 times in the direction of the tabernacle doorway. Understand that since he was quite a distance away from the set-apart place, a line of vision had to be established so that he could actually see the door leading into the set-apart place. Got that? Step 3, the whole cow, as in every part of it, was completely burnt up on the now raging bonfire. While the cow was being roasted, the priest would throw in some cedar wood, some hyssop, also known as oregano, and a red-coloured thread to the mix. Step 4, following the burning was the bathing. The priest removed his ritual garments and bathed in water. And if there was an assistant with him, he too bathed and changed into a new set of clothes. Understand that the priest was not allowed to return to the camp until the sun set. And even after returning to the camp, he and his assistant, if there was one, would be ritually unclean until sundown. Again, this indicates the end of the current day and the beginning of the next. Sundown, we know that. Step 5. A man who had up to this point in time not participated in the ritual, a man who had up until this point not participated in the ritual and thus was still ritually clean, he came out to collect all the ashes and put them in a special chosen spot. Later, this pile of red heifer ashes would be combined with water, resulting in the powerful potion that would be used to purify anyone who had come into contact with a corpse. Since the man who had just gathered up the ashes was now ritually unclean, he also had to take a bath and would be in an unclean state until sunset too. And those are the steps. What do you think? So that's just summarizing a bit. That's what we just read in the scriptures. Those steps there. That's what happens. This is the purification for touching a dead person through the red heifer. So death is purified through the red heifer, in essence. Now this was interesting. Remember back in Leviticus we talked about the 5 offerings that Yisrael were instructed to offer up in the smoke. Remember, it was visual. They believed that their Elohim, their deity, was up in the sky, sitting up there, breathing all this in, loving it. So it was very visual. It was a reminder to them, So let's recall what those 5 sacrifices were. We have the 𝔹𝕙𝕒𝕚𝕚, the minka, the suah, the hata'at, and the asham. In other words, they're the Hebrew words. We have the ascending near offering. Remember that one? We have the love grain offering, the intimate peace offering, the purifying offering, or what they often call the sin offering. And then there was the guilt, which we've called the forgiveness offering. All right? Interesting that was called the guilt offering though, isn't it? So, now which one of these 5 general classifications do you think the red heifer ritual falls under? Let's have a look. For the red heifer sacrifice, the meat of this sacrifice was not to be eaten, and the animal had to be burnt outside the camp, making it fall under the purifying category up here, the hata'at, the purifying offering. Remember that most English Bibles translate the purifying offering as a sin offering, but that is a gross mistranslation because its function, rather than being an offering that pays for disobedient behaviour, is to purify one from the toxic effects of their disobedience, contaminating the person who had become defiled. It wasn't about the actual behaviour or sin, it was about the person who needed purifying. Remember we talked about all that? The toxic effects of disobedience? So that's why the word sin is a bad word, because it's not actually to purify rather than being an offering that pays for disobedient behaviour, it is to purify one from the toxic effects of their disobedience. Toxic effects of their disobedience, and decontaminating the person who had become defiled. However, what made this purifying offering unique, so we've already established that it's the purifying offering up here, the hata'at. So what made this offering stand out? Apart from the fact that it had to be done outside the camp. Most of these other ones were done at the tabernacle. This one, and often this one had to be done outside the camp. So, however, what made the purifying offering unique is that whoever officiated over the sacrifice became impure. The person who officiated over the sacrifice became unclean through doing it. And that's exactly what we see here with the red heifer sacrifice. The very same ashes of the red heifer that made the unclean clean also make the clean unclean. Most sacrifices and offerings that were raised up, all those other ones we saw there, you'd bring them to have intimate peace, to ascend near, to come close, draw near. It made you clean, it made you acceptable to Yahusha. This one, while it does that too, the very same ashes of the red heifer that made the unclean people clean also make clean people unclean. What does that mean? Isn't that both strange and fascinating? Why would Yahusha create a sacrifice that causes impurity? Let's look. This was a really good analogy I found. The purifying offering acts like a spiritual absorbent that sucks out of the defiled person all of the impurities he's acquired because of the dead body he's touched, or because of the disobedience over the course of a year, or because of whatever it was offered up for. So it sucks out all the evil. Let's say that you have a sponge that was used to absorb and suck up all those impurities that a poisoned person had. That sponge, now being filled with such an enormous amount of impurity, poison, would be quite a poisonous and dangerous object, don't you think? That is precisely why anybody else who was involved in the decontamination red heifer ritual became contaminated or impure as well. And that's also why the sponge, which is the red heifer, has to be destroyed in an unclean place far away from the camp of Israel. Obviously, such an impure object cannot be offered up on the set apart brazen altar. And remember, the purifying offering is not a sacrifice that is offered up to Yahusha? No, it's set apart for destruction. However, there is a key difference between the normal purifying offering and the red heifer sacrifice. None of the blood of the red heifer is to be splashed on the brazen altar. So it's not to provide atonement or acceptability. It's not to go near the set apart place or the brazen altar, which had the divine fire from the other dimension. No way. The blood remained inside the red cow as it is roasted to a crisp outside the camp. Understand this? We're coming into this, I think I mentioned it later, but think today as far as radioactivity, as far as contamination, viruses, quarantine, isolation. Think about this. If you've got a sponge that's just sucked out all the poison from somebody and someone's carrying around a filthy, germy old virus-ridden sponge, that wouldn't just be sat next to your bedside, on your bedside table, would it? Wouldn't be put on your dinner table next to your food, would it? You wouldn't wash your body with it. It's viral, it's poisonous. So that had to be taken out to the garbage dump and disposed of very, very carefully, destroyed so that it didn't spread. Well, we're talking spiritually here, guys, because it's talking about disobedience, and it's all to do with the tabernacle, of course, which kept the portal open. So we're talking about spiritual uncleanliness, of course, and it's not literal poison in the sponge. The red heifer wasn't literally poisoned. We're talking about all when they laid their hands on it and things like that, the blame, all the disobedience, all of it went onto that animal, and it was symbolic, of course. We're talking about shadows here, talking about not pretty, but we're talking about simple illustrations which were brought up in this culture which they were in, because they were sacrificing animals, eating animals, they were farming and had all this sort of stuff, so they understood it. It's shadows for these people, right? It wasn't literal radioactivity, but as far as Yahusha is concerned, as far as connecting these connecting these dimensions through the portal, it was very important, because he can't come near anything unclean. That's why he can't be in this world except through a cleansed out temple, tabernacle, through that portal. So the portal at this time was sitting on top of the ark, and that's why everything around it had to be, radioactively clean, not unclean. Otherwise, whatever comes into his presence gets frackled up. He's not going to be defiled. So you'll be defiled, you'll be destroyed, frackle up if you come into his presence. So that was interesting, wasn't it, about the sponge? That's what the red heifer acted like, a sponge. If you're not quite grasping it, keep with me. I'm going to go into a few more things and it will become obvious. Let's talk about the actual fire, because this animal had to be burnt to a crisp. And I've already mentioned that it wasn't the same fire. It wasn't allowed anywhere near the divine fire that was on the brazen altar in the tabernacle grounds. No way. Intimacy or destruction? A fire of intimacy or a fire for destruction? There's different types of fire mentioned in scripture too. I'm not going to go into the Hebrew meanings, but I'm just going to explain it to you. Let's compare the fire used to burn up the red heifer with the fire used on the brazen altar in the tabernacle. We talked about that a couple of episodes ago. There were some words we looked up about being consumed, didn't we? Burning up. So let's compare the fire. The fire of the brazen altar, which was inside the camp of Israel, was a set apart fire from Yahusha's high dimension that purified, and it was used to offer up a pleasing aroma of smoke to him. So it's pleasing. It allowed people to ascend near, come towards me, come to me, have intimate peace, have love, the love grain offering, have all these things, be purified, that sort of thing. However, the fire used to burn up the red heifer, which took place outside the camp of Israel, was a common fire, whose purpose was to destroy. The objective of this fire was to completely end the existence of whatever was put on it, because it was filled with poisonous impurities. Think of burning waste dumps. Think of burning waste dumps that destroy contaminated waste materials in a faraway, safe place. Again, keep in mind that the set apartness of Yahusha is like dealing with nuclear radiation. that is so dangerously contagious it can infect anybody who comes near. Understand that? The red heifer sacrifice was kind of like this, soaking up so much impurity from others that anyone who approached it instantly became unclean. Remember, the guy that did the sacrifice was unclean now. His assistant became unclean. Then when it turned into ashes, someone else would have to come out who was already clean. They'd move it around, put it in the safe place, put it in the Tupperware containers and put it in the cupboard outside the camp. Now they've been touching it, so they're unclean too. See how it's radioactive? They're now infected with it as well. So Yahusha's radioactivity, clean, and also the uncleanliness, clean, that's like radioactive. Think of it like radiation, yeah, like that. That's why Yahusha said to Musha, take off your sandals. This is set apart ground, because he was there in the bush was attached to the ground, and however powerful, we don't know it was, there was a radius, there was a fallout, there was a radioactivity going on around this burning bush. And if Musha, who was allowed to step in, he was given permission. He was chosen to do that. If he'd stepped in there, it wasn't so much about reverence. People are, he was just being reverent and showing respect. Maybe, maybe not, but it was mainly about radioactivity. If he'd walked in there with his normal sandals on, he was wearing normal clothes and he was a normal person, so that wasn't a problem. But when he walked out of there, he would have radioactivity on his sandals. He'd walk it back to his home, to people who may not have been chosen to, he might shake it. Do you know what I'm saying? He's spreading this radioactivity. So he said, take your sandals off. Now that sparks many, many conversations. Well, didn't his set apart feet touch the sandals? Now the sandals are, who knows? I'm just saying, understand this whole idea of radioactivity, yeah? So anyone who approached this red heifer became unclean because it was used to soak up all the impurities, mainly in this case of death. So when one performs the red heifer sacrifice, or any purifying sacrifice for that matter, it doesn't benefit or atone for the person performing the ritual. It doesn't benefit or atone for the person performing the ritual. Think about it. If you were, not that they probably did, but if you were keeping a tally of how many if you were keeping a tally in your little logbook of how many things you did per day or per week to make you unclean or unacceptable, and at the end of the week there was a contest for the person who'd done the least amount of things to make you unclean. This guy doesn't benefit, does he? Well, that's not fair because I got told to go out and sacrifice the red heifer. I didn't do anything wrong. I was doing what I was told to do, but it made me unclean. So yeah, I got a cross in his little ledger. So see what I'm saying? It didn't benefit this guy. He was made unclean. He wasn't allowed home for a day. He had to stay outside for the rest of the day, out with all the mixed rabble, mixed multitude. So he may not have had a good time out there, but see what I'm saying? It doesn't benefit the person who had to do this sacrifice. They'd probably be, who's drawing the short straw this week, this month, Did you catch that? The purpose of the blood of the animal used in any sacrifice, purifying sacrifice, is not to purify the worshipper or atone for him. Sure, the blood of the animal performs a purifying function, but if you were to go back and read the text of Leviticus carefully, you would see that the blood of the animal is splashed on the altar and on the pieces of furniture inside the sanctuary, because its purpose was to purify the sanctuary, not atone for the one performing the sacrifice. Interesting? In the red heifer sacrifice, the one who performs the ritual doesn't get purified. In fact, the opposite happens. He becomes unclean. His assistant becomes unclean. The poor bugger that comes out to pick up the ashes and put them in the cupboard, he becomes unclean too. However, the blood from the sacrificed red heifer, when mixed with the ashes from the burnt up water and body, purifies whatever this mixture is splashed on. Got that? The blood from the sacrificed red heifer, when mixed with the ashes from the burnt up body and water, purifies whatever this mixture is splashed on. So once it's burnt up, consumed and destroyed, the blood of that animal and the other bits and pieces they threw into the fire, all of that herbs and spices mix that's been mixed up, ground up, this special blend, now purifies whatever it's splashed on. The whole purpose of the regular purifying sacrifice was to use the blood of the animal to purify the tabernacle and its furnishings. It did not atone for the one who performed the offering, nor was this sacrifice offered up to Yahusha. Isn't that amazing? The one Levitical sacrifice that most English Bibles call the sin offering doesn't even atone for sin. So screw your head on right. The one Levitical sacrifice that most English Bibles call the sin offering doesn't even atone for sin or disobedient behavior at all. It doesn't. That's why I called it a purifying offering, because the end result is that you are purified. You know, it doesn't deal with your sinfulness. It deals with you that has been contaminated by your sinfulness. So Yahusha fulfilled the red heifer. Let's push this home. Yahusha fulfilled the red heifer shadow. Anyone who didn't become purified through the water. You happy guys? I've got a black man on the stake today. Thought you'd like that. Blackened him up a bit for you. Yahusha fulfilled the red heifer shadow. Anyone who didn't become purified, through the water was cut off from the camp, because when a person becomes defiled from touching a dead body, etc., it could result in defiling Yahusha's set-apart tabernacle, and that just cannot be permitted. This was all about the tabernacle, not about you guys. It's about you staying clean, so that if you come anywhere near my tabernacle, it doesn't get defiled, and you don't get freckled up. It's for your benefit too. Surely we can understand this concept of cleansing and not spreading something contagious in today's 21st century climate of virus laws and quarantine. So I hope this whole radioactivity, viral, not spreading the poison is clear to us. Everyone's talking about it today. So the whole purpose of the red heifer sacrifice was to purify Yahusha's set-apart tabernacle. But if this is the case, why is the Kernel Special Blend, a bit of a KFC blend, 11 secret herbs and spices, why is this special blend of red heifer ashes and living water applied to a human being to purify him after he touches a corpse? What's this about? So what's that? The purpose of the red heifer sacrifice was to purify Yahusha's set-apart tabernacle. But if this is the case, why is this special blend of red heifer ashes and living water, the red thread and all that sort of stuff, why is this applied to a human being to purify him after he touches a corpse? Because remember, the whole purpose of this was to purify somebody after they touched a dead person, something dead in the field, someone dead. It's all about death. Yahusha hates death. This was the antidote for the death. You are now unclean because you've been around death. How do we get cleansed? You go to the pile of red heifer ashes, mix it with some living water, sprinkle it on yourself, or someone would sprinkle it on you. So, as Yahusha's bride, we are now considered to be the set-apart tabernacle, or temple of the living Elohim, where a portal connects his higher dimension to this lower one on the throne, on the ark of our hearts. So just as a person who was contaminated by a corpse had to be purified in case he defiled the tabernacle of Yahusha, we too must be ceremonially cleansed. What? I have to be ceremonially cleansed? When no one told me about that. I'm not coming into all that ceremonial nonsense. We all have to be ceremonially cleansed and purified before any kind of indwelling of Yahusha's spirit and portal connection can occur. So just as a person was contaminated by a corpse, had to be purified in case he defiled the tabernacle, we too must be ceremonially cleansed and purified before any kind of indwelling of Yahusha's spirit and portal connection can occur. And what ingredients, 11 secret herbs and spices, what ingredients were in this purifying red heifer blend? Just blood and water. The blood that was inside the ashes of the red heifer and the living running water. Remember, for this sacrifice, the blood was not drained from the animal. So when the red heifer was burnt to a crisp outside the camp, although dried up at the end, there were thoroughly blood-soaked ashes, in a sense. Got it? The blood of the animal was still in it when it was burnt. Blood was not drained out. So, blood and water. Now, what did 𝗂𝗏𝗏 point out concerning Yahusha's death? Remember when Yahusha died on the stake? One of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. Why such a detailed wording that both blood and water came out? Why such a detailed wording? Because blood atones and water purifies. And both actions were needed when Yahusha's tabernacle, his living bride, became defiled. You got that? That's why blood and water. That's how we are cleansed and washed clean before any kind of indwelling of Yahusha's spirit and portal connection can occur. Understand it? This is going deeper, guys, understanding the red heifer. Because, I mean, these are all shadows, of course. Obviously, we don't sacrifice Red Bulls today. Red Bull, yeah? KFC and Red Bull. Obviously, we don't do that today. It's shadows. Yahusha fulfilled it. The connection between the red heifer and Yahusha's death is very similar to the ritual of the scapegoat, which served as an 𝗪𝗓𝗄𝗧 to Satan, removing all the personal disobedience he'd sown into the camp of Israel over the course of that year. Likewise, the red heifer was to take away the defilement of death that stood between mankind and Yahusha. Remember the living bird dipped into the water and the blood and then let loose in the field to purify skin infections, symbolizing the purifying of death from personal disobedience. This was also done outside the camp, most of it, and this is why Yahusha had to die. This is the point, guys. This is why Yahusha had to die outside of the temple area, murdered for the lawlessness and disobedience that existed both inside, but mainly outside, the temple area. He was sacrificed outside the camp. So that's why all these other sacrifices, like the scapegoat, the two birds that were sacrificed for the skin infections, you know, the living bird dipped in the water and the blood. All these symbolic things speak of what Yahusha did outside the camp, in the unclean place. As we know, the temple symbolizes the Shekinah, or divine presence of Yahusha, the portal. So, even though his presence was absent from the temple at this time in history, by Yahusha dying outside the camp, it speaks of the fact that the Father looked away, turned his back on Yahusha, disconnected himself and the higher dimension from Yahusha, while he bore all the wickedness and evil on his shoulders. And that was the only one thing that Yahusha feared. That's what he was sweating drops of blood. How connected must he have been to the higher dimension through his life, particularly his latter life when he was anointed by the Ruach. How connected must he have been if the one thing, obviously he would have been fearing the pain of being murdered. You know, he knew what was going to come on him, but he was mainly afraid of being disconnected, I should say. He feared that more than anything else. Dealt with this in other episodes. That would be like, find your greatest fear in life and then immerse yourself in it. Snakes, spiders, cockroaches, slugs, you know, whatever it is that you fear the most that makes your skin crawl. Imagine being immersed in a whole bathtub of them for 3 days and 3 nights. You know, that's Yahusha. So, what he did for us. So now that we know the pattern, this is what's exciting about reading. That's why I'm going to do these scriptures in order, because it's so exciting to know the patterns. And then when you read scriptures like this, you just go, oh, well, I know what that means now because I know the pattern. If the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a red heifer, sprinkling the defiled, set people apart and cleanse their flesh. So if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a red heifer set people apart and cleansed their flesh from death, remember, touching a dead body, don't you think the blood of the Mashiach, which was offered up perfect and unblemished in every way, is much more powerful to cleanse your conscience from lifeless shadow works and observances, allowing you to serve him? And because of this, he is now the mediator. We know what a mediator is now too. He is the mediator of a renewed blood covenant. Musha was the original mediator. He is now the mediator of a renewed blood covenant. renewed blood covenant deliverance, redeeming us from all the crimes we committed under the original blood covenant, and offering those called by the Master the promise of an eternal inheritance. So he's not replacing the original covenant, he's renewing it. He's lifting it up again. He didn't cancel it out. I mean, yeah, he divorced his bride and this and that. The actual covenant itself, he just renewed it. Why would he change? Well, his word is him. He is his word. His covenant, his Torah, all those things. He's the living word. Why would he lift up a different one? Oh, don't worry about that old one back then. That was just a product. I didn't have my head on. I was hungover. I didn't know what I was talking about back then. You know, like, no, of course it's the same covenant, same blood covenant. He just renewed it again and allowed everybody to come in. It wasn't about genealogy or bloodline. So that's why I mentioned the, where is it? Redeeming us from all the crimes we committed under the original blood covenant and offering those called by the Master the promise of an everlasting inheritance. Until Yahusha's death, only unintentional crimes could be atoned for by animal sacrifices. But all intentional crimes were executed. So under the original covenant, some say old, don't like that word, old and new. If you use those words, who on earth wants to know about the old one? We'll take the new car, thanks, who wants an old one? So original is a better word because it was there first. Under the original blood covenant, only unintentional crimes could be atoned for and forgiven by animal sacrifices. But all intentional crimes, which let's be honest, all of us have done crimes, disobedience, sinfulness on purpose. So we would all fall into that category and we all should be executed. So that's what Yahusha did. Took the place, paid the price, paid the bride price, ransomed back, paid the ransom. So this was interesting. Understanding the red heifer sacrifice, it's probably the most prestigious of the sacrifices because it was to purify somebody from death, not cure them of death, but purify them of being in contact with death. And isn't that what Yahusha did? Purified us from becoming dead, took the death for us. Let's look at this a bit closer. Red heifer, red is the color of the stain of disobedience. In Isaiah it says, even though your disobedience is like scarlet and red like crimson. A couple of scriptures that talk about disobedience and evil being like red like crimson. Red is the color of the skin infections dealt with in Leviticus 2. Interestingly, scarlet or red is also associated with such things as lust, anger, passion, Santa Claus, Christmas, the devil, whorehouses, the whore of Babylon, religious robes of some Christian clergy and also some Buddhist monks. One of the Hebrew meanings for Adam, this was interesting. One, I didn't know that. I had to look this up again because I thought, no, I don't know about that. I thought Adam meant more black because black. No. Look at this. The Hebrew word for Adam, lost my spot. Here. One of the Hebrew meanings for Adam is also red, like the clay earth that Yahusha formed the first man from. Interesting. One of the Hebrew meanings, look up the word Adam, it means red. Like the clay earth that Yahusha formed the first man from. Adam, well, that doesn't mean he wasn't black, it just means, Adam also means ruddy, red, bloody or rosy in color. Interesting. Red is also the color of the second Adam, Yahusha, our Messiah, who was literally covered in his own blood while hanging on the torture stake. Burning the red heifer represented the death and suffering of our Messiah on the stake and Elohim's fiery judgment against all evil and disobedience. More care was exercised in choosing a spotless red heifer than in any other sacrifice. And this spotless purity represents Yahusha, the only perfect being. He was the only man still who's walked the earth who was perfect. He never did anything wrong. Imagine being around something like that. The red heifer is just one more of the many shadow pictures that point to the suffering servant Messiah found in Scripture. Other prophetic shadows of Yahusha include Abel's sacrifice, Yitzchak on Mount Moriah, and the ram caught in the thorns, the Passover lamb, the 2 goats offered at Yom Kippur, Yahusha at the burning bush, the various ascending near offerings and other sacrifices, Aaron's rod that budded. These are all things that refer to Yahusha. Some of them, there's stacks more of them, but these are a lot of the main ones. The water from the rock in the wilderness, I think we're coming to that next episode. The serpent on the pole, the tree thrown into the bitter waters, making them sweet and drinkable, and the red heifer that had carried no yoke. Similarly, so just like the red heifer that carried no yoke, it had never been put to work or carried any heavy burdens. Similarly, Yahusha was neither under the yoke of any evil crime or behavior, nor was beholden to or under bondage to any institute, human, government, religious system, or anything else of the earthly nature. He was free and pure to make this sacrifice for his bride, really, not the whole world, his bride. He made the sacrifice for the bride. He doesn't love the whole world, he loves his bride. He came to redeem his bride, who he's calling out of all nations, but those who choose him are his bride. So to say, oh, he loves everybody evil, no. Look what he's doing to the world. Plagues and everything because of how they behave, how they treat him. So he wasn't under any human, any institution, government, religious system, or anything else. He was pure, perfect. The heifer was slain outside of the camp, as we know. During the first and second temple eras, the red heifer was slain on the Mount of Olives by the priests. Interesting, because the Mount of Olives is located just east of the Temple Mount and outside the walls of the city of Jerusalem. And Messiah Yahusha was murdered outside of the city gates of Jerusalem and very possibly on the Mount of Olives, from which the front of the temple and the veil was clearly visible. Because remember, the red veil was visible from where he died. So they could see the tabernacle, they could see the temple, I should say, from where Yahusha died. Just like the priest had to be able to see the tabernacle from where he sacrificed the red heifer. So let's look at these 3 components that went into the special secret blend. The kernels, 11 secret herbs and spices. Into the burnt heifer blend went these 3 things: cedar, hyssop, and scarlet. What's the symbolism of that? We can't leave this without talking about those, because these ingredients are used in other sacrifices as well at different times, but I've never really gone into them before, so we're going to now. The cedar tree grows tall, imposing, and wide, symbolizing haughtiness and the arrogance of all disobedient behavior, which stands in rebellion against Yahusha. Remember we talked about humility last episode? Being humble, broken, crushed, consumed, yeah? Talked about at the beginning of this episode too, being burnt up, purified. This wood was used to build a house for King David as well as for the temple that Shlomo built, his son. This also points to the torture stake, which was made of wood. So that's the cedar tree, big and tall and imposing and proud and haughty. Hyssop speaks to the idea that to gain atonement, the cedar one, the proud one, the cedar tree, must bow in humility like a blade of hyssop. Understand that? So the cedar tree was big, tall, broad, haughty, proud, but in order to be atoned, it would need to bend over like a blade of hyssop, be humble. In 1 Kings 4, we see the contrast of the great cedar trees to even the hyssop. Hyssop was used to put the blood of the Passover lamb on the doorposts, as well as to put the sour wine to Yahusha's lips while on the stake. It is a medicinal plant known for its cleansing properties too. So, the majestic cedar of Lebanon represents pride, and hyssop represents humility. What about the scarlet? Scarlet represents the stain of wicked disobedience to Yahusha's instructions. Scarlet is pretty much red. We just looked into the word red. This is the idea of scarlet. It represents the stain of wicked disobedience to Yahusha's instructions. The priests made red dye from a snail or insect. a lowly creature symbolizing repentance and newfound humility. This is one of the colours in the tabernacle too, as well as the priestly garments. It is also a colour of royalty and prosperity, and the colour that Matthew describes as well as that of the robe the Roman soldiers put on Yahusha before his death. Scarlet robe, remember? We also see the cedar wood, the hyssop and the scarlet in Leviticus for cleansing one of the infectious skin diseases, which was, what is it? We also see the cedar wood, the hyssop and the scarlet in Leviticus for cleansing a person with the infectious skin disease, which was Yahusha's judgment against the evil behaviour of lashem hara, evil tongue, greed, pride and jealousy. Remember we talked about that? Somebody was being disobedient, and mainly the behaviour of evil tongue, gossiping and being rude and angry, and what comes out of your mouth, they would break out in a skin infection. That was one of the main judgments for that sort of behaviour. What we're seeing today happen. Viruses and everything. So that was the meaning of the cedar tree: pride, hyssop, humility, and scarlet being what was needed to be. That stood for disobedience, evil. So interesting. This is all about cleansing. Today's episode is all about cleansing and how they were to be cleansed back in tabernacle days. This was a fun fact. Don't know if you want to know this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Soap, fun fact. We've just read that the ashes of the red heifer, when mixed with water, was used as a purification for disobedience. Interestingly, the main cleansing ingredient in soap is lye, which can be made by straining water through a bucket of ashes. Interesting. I wonder if that's, I'm just thinking too, when you colour people's hair, sometimes you get a little bit of tint around their forehead, and they've got, tint removers and stuff in bottles now, but back in the good old days, you used to be able to rub cigarette ash on their forehead, and all the colour would come out. That just came to me right now. But so in order to make soap, you strain water through a bucket of ashes. That's how you make lye, which is the main ingredient in soap. And to make the conventional soap, which we're all familiar with today, other ingredients are added to the lye water, such as animal or vegetable fat, to give it a functional form, as well as perfumes and skin conditioning agents and additional ingredients to make the soap lather. Lye water by itself is a caustic cleansing agent that purifies and disinfects. Caustic means it's pretty harsh. So lye water by itself is a caustic cleansing agent that purifies and disinfects. Interesting. What a beautiful picture. What a beautiful picture the red heifer and its ashes are of Yahusha's blood that was shed on the torture stake to cleanse us from all our crimes of disobedient behaviour against him and deliver us from all evil. And all of this was because he loves us so very much and wants us as his bride. Isn't that beautiful? So if you couldn't quite grasp all the ins and outs of the sacrifice, it did go pretty intense today with the theory. If you didn't quite understand, you can watch it again, but go through it. But the main purpose I want you to get out of all that is the main purpose of the red heifer sacrifice. What a beautiful picture the red heifer and its ashes are of Yahusha's blood that was shed on the torture stake to cleanse us from all our crimes of disobedient behaviour against him and deliver us from all evil. And all of this was because he loves us so much and wants us as his bride. And I would like to finish with this short word here. It's more of a testimony, really. A sister sent this to me this week, which was really phenomenal, because like most things that come up on my Facebook or that I see, it relates right to this week's word, relates right to this week's message video. And it talked about guilt. Remember right up the top, I'm not going to scroll, but remember right up at the top, it talked about one of the offerings used to be called, in a lot of scriptures, it's called the guilt offering. Well, I've changed it to the forgiveness offering because it's actually what it did. It was the function of the sacrifice to forgive the person. Let's look at this word guilt, or guilty, asham. To be guilty, punished, perish, certainly become made desolate, destroyed, greatly found, hold guilty, offend, Acknowledge offense. Acknowledge your offense. Acknowledge your offense. Acknowledge your trespass. 8:18, Hashem, guilty, presenting a sin offering, one who is faulty, guilty, a criminal, on account guilty, to offend the sinful sinner, morally wrong, concretely, actively bad person, condemned, guilty, wicked man. And this is what she wrote. We're going to finish. Yep, we're going to finish on this, guys. Giving an outline how this state of being guilty has been a part of my life for a long time. Looking at the Hebrew word, I can see that being an offender, morally wrong and worldly, led me to feel guilty. That's what those things lead us to, guys. That's how you feel. And when you feel or know you're guilty or hiding something, you have shifty, strange behavior. I couldn't get out of that feeling by myself. I tried to cover up and sneak around with an air of superiority towards anyone that was getting too close to discovering my true self. Using others to do and say what I intended so I would appear innocent. After finding Yahusha though, I had a great relief and started my journey of admitting to obvious faults, but never completely believing that I could get really cleaned out. Never believed I could really get cleaned out and forgiven. Over the years, I have come to terms with my sin and bad attitudes, trusting Yahusha and believing that he really does what he says in his word. I had held on to religious traits as a security, just in case this fresh movement was just another farce. But I now know and understand for sure what Yahusha wants from me, a full surrender. This text has given me the answer to overcome my wrong behavior. In Psalm 32, blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven. His transgression, his disobedient behavior. Blessed is the one whose disobedience is forgiven, whose disobedience, whose evil is covered. Blessed is the man to whom Yahuwah imparts no crookedness, and in whose ruach there is no deceit. I think that should say deceit. Deceit. Yeah, I think that should say deceit. Anyway, so you can see, this is a real living, beating relationship going on from these words. You can see that happening. Are you having this experience, guys? Are you facing daily what your behavior is, why you respond to certain things the way you do, why you say things to certain people that you do, what rises up in you when certain people come around or when they communicate to you? Are you knowing yourself, observing yourself, looking in the mirror, which is what Yahusha's word is? It's a big mirror. That's why a lot of people don't want to go in there and read it properly. It shows you who you are in the sight of a perfect man, a perfect Elohim, creator, Yahusha. So that was the red heifer today, guys. I hope that was a comprehensive thesis on all the things you need to know about the red heifer. Because it's truly amazing, isn't it, what Yahusha did? It's all about Yahusha. We don't have to sacrifice bulls. What about up the top there? They're looking for, people on the earth are looking, trying to breed a perfect red heifer for the temple sacrifice. That would just be like religion, wouldn't it? Just be like a religion. No idea. Read it on the page and assume we need a red heifer. We need a temple. We need another temple, So don't be like them, guys. It's all about the portal, remember? All about the portal. And in order to have a portal connection, if you haven't taken these steps, you need to acknowledge your disobedient, unlawful, dreadful behavior outside of Yahusha's blood covenant from your whole life and come to him. Cry out to him, go into the waters of immersion, and that's your cleansing. Your belief in the blood of Yahusha to cleanse you, and you are ceremonially washed. Yeah? Just like they were with the red heifer. The blood and the ashes was mixed with water and sprinkled on them. Just add water. It's dehydrated blood. Just add water. And they sprinkled it to cleanse them, and then they had to be washed. They washed themselves. So we get ceremonially washed. That's our immersion. We come up a new creature. We're still the same age, same bad habits, same everything really, but spiritually there's been a shift. There's been a set of partners. There's been a change of ownership. And he comes and he puts a down payment. Through your belief, through your acceptance of him, he puts a down payment of his ruach in you. And that ruach connects with his throne room, his higher dimension. A portal opens up. And from that portal, he trains you. Remember the one? He grabs your throat sometimes and throws you around. Don't do that. Stop it. You know, loving, encouraging, flogging, disciplining, chastising. That's the experience the bride is on. The bride is having. So come into it, guys. It's a real living experience with you and Yahusha. In your own life, own job, own family, own home. You don't have to go out there, pay money, do any of this nonsense. It's between you and him. So stay strong and we'll be back shortly. See you later.